Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidikena yopakarottam pravaram muninam Patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve Patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya kramat vivaranasya cha. So, today we are discussing one of the most important sutras in this particular chapter that deals with the liberation. The final solution to the problem. So we had to remember it is called the quadrangle of dukkha. How a wise person, when he reaches a particular stage in his spiritual evolution or cultural evolution, feels that there is a higher meaning to our life. Life has got a higher dimension, a spiritual dimension. And this particular feeling is called parinama dukkha, a very technical term used in this particular chapter. So, though from a worldly sense our life is going on fine, there is no problem, we have all our desires fulfilled. At empirical level, life is perfectly satisfactory, no complaint, nothing to look for beyond what you have already achieved. Still you feel a kind of internal, spiritual dissatisfaction, discontentment. This doesn't happen to everyone. This happens only to some people who are spiritually or culturally evolved, to look beyond the empirical life, the life of everyday activities and experiences. Those who want to seek a higher meaning, a higher significance, a higher relevance to life. So they feel if they have a feeling of inner incompleteness, which is rooted in a strong desire for a higher meaning, for a higher dimension in spiritual life. Then it's called parinama dukkha. So Vyasa, I have already quoted many times, Vyasa makes this point very clear. This parinama dukkha happens only to a person who is trying to be a yogi. Otherwise, we don't feel any dissatisfaction or feeling of imperfection with the everyday occurrence. We already saw the example of Buddha. For Buddha, everything was all right. He was born in a palace. His father was a king, and he was brought up in luxurious circumstances. He did not feel any want, any misery, and everything was all right for him from purely empirical worldly sense. Till when he found a sick man, a dead body, an old aged person, immediately he understood there are some problems in this world. That problem was not his problem, a problem that is so on the face of a sick man or a dead body or an old man. That misery made him think, that picture of a miserable person made him think of a higher dimension in life. So, even without or before going through any problem, you feel that there is a problem in this perfect, satisfactory, luxurious life. So that is the beginning of spiritual evolution. And as you evolve further, you reach a level of contemplation, then you look for a meaning you look for a cause for this imperfection is called dukkha. And then you look for a way out of this, very similar to the paradigm of dukkha in the Buddhist tradition, in the Tripitakas as mentioned, and in the Ayurveda also, from the medical standpoint, is called triangle paradigm. The Vyasa evolves a unique paradigm in yoga, which is based on this idea of dukkha. So we have reached that. Now in 25th verse, the method of liberation, the meaning of liberation is explained. Before that, in the 24th one, tasya hetuhu avidya. So the cause of this association of the seer and the seen, the experiencer and the experienced, the subject and object, the reason why we identify ourselves with the emerging external or internal objects of experience, this identification is rooted in samyoga. And the cause of this samyoga is avidya or ignorance, or this already we explained in the last sutra. Now 25th one, tad abhavat samyoga bhavo hanam tad drishye kaivalyam. This is the 25th one. Now, the absence of this avidya, this ignorance, leads to a complete cessation of this samyoga association. That means we no longer associate ourselves with the intellect which perceives different external objects or experiences different internal feelings or emotions. So this association makes us forget our true identity, that we are Purusha, that we are the conscious, the omniscient reality. So that is forgotten. So we identify ourselves with the different objects belonging to Prakriti, of the unconscious external nature. So it is rooted, it caused by avidya or ignorance. When you transcend this avidya, the absence of this avidya or ignorance leads to a complete cessation of this association. And this is the state of liberation of the drashta, the seer. It is explained here. Now Vyasa explains this avidya. Vipariya jnana vasana ityartha. Means an internal, an inherent later subconscious impression or vasanas of wrong knowledge. We develop a habit of associating ourselves with the external objects. I mean, if we see an object, we identify ourselves as the seer of that object, the experiencer of that object, or even internal emotions emerge, we identify ourselves as the experiencer, the seer of that internal emotions. This is avidya. And when you go beyond this avidya, it is called liberation. In the Buddhist tradition, in the original Tripitakas, sometimes, this idea, this concept of liberation is given a kind of anthropomorphic meaning. So sometimes called, So there is a statement in the Dhammapada, it's called Sutta Pitaka, Durangamam ekacharam asariram guhasayam. Ye chittam sanjametsanti mokhinti marabandhana. This is Pali. Its Sanskrit version is Durangamam ekacharam asariram guhasayam ye chittam samyasyanti muchyante marabandhana. So marabandhana, Mara is a personified form of all the evil vasanas, samskaras, impressions that emerge in the mind. So Mara is in a kind of equivalent to maybe the Buddhist equivalent of the devil, maybe in Christian mystical tradition. So where yoga explains all the temptations, all the problems, internal problems or external problems, are on the basis of this wrong association, the wrong impressions that we have already gathered, which create problems and obstacles. In other scriptures, in other traditions, it is given a slightly different orientation. It means when the mind goes far, moving alone, and then when we are able to restrain the mind, it will be liberated from the clutches of Maya. That is the Dhammapada equivalent of this same idea. So what is Kaivalyam? That is the subject here. What is Kaivalyam? You find in Swami Vivekananda's complete works some of the most oft-quoted, famous statements that we quote from Swami Vivekananda's complete works are found in his interpretation of this particular sutra. I can read some of them, I can quote some of them, because apparently Swamiji was trying to explain the concept of Kaivalyam or liberation as expounded in the Yoga Sankhya tradition in a modern language, in a language that is intelligible to modern Western audience. So Swami Vivekananda's interpretation, exposition of this sutra is very famous because some of his most oft-quoted statements occur in this interpretation. So Swami Vivekananda says, according to yoga philosophy, it is through ignorance that the soul is being joined with nature. So ignorance means avidya, means avidya causes samyoga, means association causes this bondage. The aim is to get rid of nature's control over us. Now nature is controlling us, Prakriti. So nature means Prakriti. As I said in the Yoga Sankhya system, there are two fundamental categories, Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is self-conscious. It is consciousness itself, but it is inactive. Prakriti is unconscious. In Jada, that's a term used in Sanskrit. But it is the source of the whole creation. The whole universe, including our mind, our intellect, our thought currents, the external universe, all these are constituted by 23 evolutes, which emerge as a result of evolution from Prakriti, that is nature. So as I explained earlier, first Prakriti gives birth to the cosmic intellect. It's called Buddhi or Mahatattvam. From that, Ahankara comes. Ahankara has got the ego feeling. It has got three dimensions, Sattvika, the higher, the Ajasika, the middle, and Tamasika. So from Sattvika Ahankara, mind evolves. For the Ajasika Ahankara, 5 senses of perception, 5 senses of action. From Tamasika Ahankara, the 5 subtle elements. From subtle elements, 5 gross elements which constitute the external empirical universe. So this is the Sankhya Yoga scheme of evolution. So these 23 evolutes which evolve from Prakriti, nature, this is what the universe is, which is by its very nature unconscious. Now, Swami Vivekananda says, and how does the bondage occur? We identify ourselves with this external universe. I mean, how does it happen? Suppose we see a picture. We identify ourselves as the one who sees the picture. Because the Purusha reflects on the Buddhi, and Buddhi identifies all these things. So, as a result of this association, we forget the fact that we are by nature the conscious, the eternal, the absolute reality. And we identify ourselves with this empirical external universe. It's called nature. Now Swami Vivekananda says that's the goal of all religions. All traditions, all religions in a way are moving towards some kind of a liberation idea. So you find, if you look at any religion, any tradition, first we think that we are coming from a state of perfection. That's where we are trying to look for a liberation. Perfection. If a kingdom of God in Christian tradition, if you interpret in the language of yoga, it means returning to our true nature. In Vedanta, it is called Jiva Brahma Aikya, means the unity of individual soul with the universal soul. In yoga, it is again getting rid of this avidya and association and identifying ourselves with the prakriti as Purusha and not Prakriti. We completely stop our identification with the Prakriti and we realize that fact we are by our true nature. In our true nature, we are the conscious Purusha. So in all traditions you find these three ideas. One, we are coming from a state of perfection. We are heading for a state of perfection. And this intermediary stage is called life. And this is the struggle. So, every human life is an effort to get back to its original nature. I mean, it's a journey back home. That is the central thesis of Vivekananda. So here he says, each soul is potentially divine, which means in reality is divine. Why should we say each soul is potentially divine? It means right now we think it is not divine. That's why it's potentially divine. If it were not potentially divine, then we won't be thinking of going back to state of perfection. If we do not really belong to the kingdom of God, we won't think of going towards the kingdom of God. So the kingdom of God is our true nature. That's why each soul is potentially divine. It's a famous statement. The goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. Let's see. This Vivekananda continues this. So first, each soul is potentially divine. That's very important. By our true nature, we are divine. It also implies that right now we delude ourselves into thinking that we are not divine. Because we associate ourselves with nature, external nature, Prakriti. And we forget our true identity with Purusha. We misidentify ourselves with the Prakriti, the inert, external, empirical universe. The goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. So controlling internal nature means trying to control our mind, trying to turn our senses of perception from the external objects towards ourselves, towards the mind, and then going beyond the mind, the intellect, and going beyond intellect to the reality, the Purusha, the Atman within. Do this either by work, or worship, or psychic control, or philosophy, by one or more or all of this, and be free. So the freedom is the central goal. Freedom from the clutches of Prakriti, if you talk about freedom from the yoga standpoint. So this freedom is achieved by denying freedom to the senses. Because if you give freedom to the senses, then it will lead to spiritual slavery. Spiritual freedom means restraining the senses. And that's what Dhammapada also says. Restraining the mind, that leads to liberation. Dhammapada says from the clutches of Mara, but it means from the wrong perception that we are part of this Prakriti, this external nature. So this can be done through Karma Yoga. First, we give a spiritual orientation to our natural tendency to be always in a state of action. Nobody can keep quiet for one split second. So, Lord Krishna says in the Gita, Naki kasik shanam abhi jadu dishtati akarma krita. Karyadehi avashak karma sarva pragudijehi gunaihi. That's what Gita says. See, we can't keep quiet even for one split second. If physically if we are inactive, mentally we will be hyperactive. If we are sitting quiet in an easy chair, then also we will be active. Mind will be busy. So there is no way out of this inherent condition of our mind, to be always in a state of action. But action creates problems. Action binds us. If we do anything, we'll have a plan in mind, a goal, an aim. If we don't achieve the goal, it leads to disappointment, depression. If we do achieve, then we always expect our work to be always successful, and it doesn't really happen that way, so it leads to disappointment, anxiety, all these other related problems. So this action should be given, our natural tendency to be always active should be given a spiritual orientation. That's what Swami Vivekananda means here. Do this either by work, attain this freedom through karma yoga. Karma is always problematic. It always binds us. If it doesn't bind us with an iron chain, it will bind you with a golden chain. Still it's the same bondage, no freedom. So our natural tendency to be active should be given a spiritual orientation. It's called karma yoga. That's what Swami Vivekananda means by here. Do this either by work or worship. You think of this universe, how this universe was created by God, a God who is compassionate, not the God with whom we have a private agreement and who will support us in whatever we do. Not that kind of God. A God who is the God of the whole creation, the whole humanity. A God whom if we worship, we cannot hate anyone. We cannot be cruel. A belief in a God which makes us more humane, more broad-minded, more universal in our outlook, which enables us to see and experience the presence of God in everything, everywhere, and everybody. So that is called worship. It's a bhakti yoga, the technical term. So Vivekananda says this freedom can be achieved either through bhakti yoga or karma yoga or psychic control. Swami Vivekananda is referring to Patanjali's yoga system here, psychic control. We will deal with the subject when we deal with the Ashtanga Yoga in the coming sutras, Yama, Niyama, etc. So, psychic control. Until we can free ourselves from nature, we are slaves. As she dictates, we must go. The yogi claims that he who controls the mind controls matter also. So the purpose of yoga is to assert our true freedom, our true individuality, that we are not matter, we are not part of the external nature, not part of Prakriti, we are by our true nature, the Purusha itself. This is the great interpretation that Swami Vivekananda gave. In fact, incidentally, when he talks about Kaivalyam or liberation, he is speaking, he's expounding that concept of liberation in a broader, in a more universal sense, not exactly as it is meant in the yoga system alone, but he gives a much higher universal exposition. Now, in the next sutra, 26th sutra, Patanjali says, the means of eradication or transcending this ignorance and this association, that's avidya, is a kind of unbroken discriminative faculty, developing a kind of discriminative faculty. The word discrimination should be understood properly. Discerning faculty, the ability to understand the real as the real, and the ability to recognize the unreal as the unreal. Very often, bondage in spiritual life is rooted in our incapacity to recognize the real as the real. And if we are not able to recognize the real as the real, we are bound to interpret the unreal as the real. That's one of the major problems in life. So Patanjali says, Vivekakhyadihi aviplava hanopayaha. So the way to get rid of this avidya or ignorance is developing this discriminative faculty, the higher discerning faculty, the faculty, the ability to understand the real as the real, and then making an effort to achieve this spiritual liberation by proper realization of the real. So Viveka Khyadi is interpreted as Sattva Purusha Anyatha Khyadi, means the knowledge of complete distinctness of the seer. That means one should be able to understand oneself as the witness, as the seer, as the subject, as the experiencer, and not identify ourselves with what is experienced, what is seen, or the objects. Now, one way to get rid of this avidya, and one important method to develop this discerning faculty, is to link ourselves to a higher spiritual ideal. You will find this in the coming sutras when we deal with this 29th sutra onwards, yama, niyama, etc., Ashtanga Yoga. There the subject will be discussed in greater detail. So Patanjali gives a very scientific and very famous interpretation of the dynamics of human mind. So first of all, we must be able to link ourselves to a higher ideal. From a common sense point of view, it helps us to conserve our energy and time and efforts and direct whatever resources we have got, mental, physical, intellectual resources, in one direction. So moving towards a higher goal is important. Moving away from a lower goal is not enough. To be able to move away from the lower levels of impressions and thought currents, we must move towards a higher goal. And this higher ideal helps us to practice internal and external control. That's why it is often stated that destruction of this ignorance doesn't take place all of a sudden. Very often, even if we realize this stage of Viveka Khyadi, a complete discriminative faculty, discerning faculty, still past impressions will remain in our mind. So Patanjali says, even if we reach a very high level of spiritual growth, a very high level of spiritual discrimination, it is always possible for some of the internal samskaras coming to the surface and take us in the wrong direction. The samskaras or the impressions and memories which we have registered in our mental system is called chittam for the last several lives may suddenly get activated when we come into interaction with some external things. To give an example, in our daily life, we come across many people. We come across many experiences. Whenever we see an object and concentrate on that object, some corresponding thought currents or impressions will gradually, naturally emerge in our mind. So here you find an external object causes a corresponding impression or vasana to emerge in the mind. So modern psychologists from a very superficial point of view will tell you, is the external experience that creates this impression? No. The external experience doesn't create an identical impression in all of us. The way we react to external impressions vary from individual to individual. Because each individual has his own big burden of impressions and memories and samskaras and vasanas that he or she may have gathered in the past life. So they are accumulated in the chittam, the mental system, mind stuff. So they decide how we react to external circumstances. If external circumstances were the only factor in our reaction to them, then they should have caused the same reaction from our mind. But it doesn't happen. So according to our impressions, according to our personality, which is constituted by impressions and samskaras or vasanas, we react. Any action that we do with perfect consciousness, awareness, will immediately create an impression in our mind. So we can see that. Suppose we are walking in the street, if we see different objects, maybe stones, pebbles, different things lying about the street, we may not notice them. So they don't create a vritti or a samskara or a vasana in our mind. But suppose we happen to interact with them consciously, with the five senses of perception and mind which are involved in our interaction with the external things, then that involvement will create an impression. So action or karma creates a vritti or a modification. It becomes a samskara. It becomes a vasana which is bound to remanifest again, if not in this life, the next life. So the way we react to external things is determined by the nature of impressions that are gathered, that we have accumulated in the mind stuff. So, one important point is, they remain in potent form, even after getting this viveka khyadi. That's why it is stated that the viveka khyadi discriminative faculty should remain aviplava, means without a break. We should be always in a state of complete awareness. So that's why in the Yogacara system, Yogacara philosophers, Buddhist tradition, we call, it's a Vijnanavada. They were also great exponents of yoga system. So many of these ideas you find later were incorporated into Yogacara philosophy. Of course, they are not identical, yoga system and Yogacara, Vijnanavada system, but still many similarities. The idea is always being in a state of perfect awareness helps us to completely get established in this viveka khyadi, and that leads to liberation. There are different views in this matter. So, this viveka khyadi, this higher discerning faculty, is explained by Bhoja, one of these commentators. Pratipaksha bhavana balat avidya pravilaya vinivritta jnatrutva kartrutva abhimanaya. So, whenever we have to encounter some negative thought currents, it should be countered by evolving a positive thought currents. So, if we feel stinginess of greed, we must counter it by evolving in our mind the reality or a complete awareness of the transitoriness of wealth or whatever we are trying to possess, tendency to possess things, greed or stinginess, great obsession, obsessive attraction towards wealth, all these things can be countered by pratipaksha bhavana, means by evolving an opposite thought current. Developing in our mind an awareness or reminding ourselves of the fact that money won't last for long. That countering Pratipaksha Bhavana will help us to get rid of negative thought currents, which we may have accumulated in our previous life. So you find all these ideas are explained in the coming sutras. Of course, Bhoja is one of the Vrittigairas, one of the commentators, explains all this in this context. Now, I would like to finish today one more or two more sutras, because we are coming to the end of one particular section. So, after today's class, the next class will be on January 22nd. So, then we will start a new section in the second chapter. It is called Ashtanga Yoga Vichara. It means the discussion of Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, which is one of the most important parts of Patanjali Yoga system. So we will complete this particular section today. In the 27th Sutra, Patanjali says, Tasya Saptadha Pranda Bhumi Prajna. Now, what happens to a yogi or a seeker of yoga when he reaches this level of discriminative faculty, discerning faculty? His insight, prajna, his insight attains sevenfold culmination. Means his spiritual insight develops higher faculties, which we'll discuss later. That means the suffering that is to be eradicated as being known by me, so there is nothing more to be known in this direction. So that feeling comes to a yogi. That is, when the Viveka-khyadi reaches, when this higher discerning faculty reaches its highest level, it gets completely differentiated into 7 kinds of prajna or insight. That means the first 4 of these highest insights refer to the 4 aspects of suffering. Means dukkha chaturviha we already discussed. First we realize the imperfection of the external things. Then we realize the cause of it. Then we realize a method to get out of it. And then we recognize the importance of attaining kaivalyam or freedom. So, these 4 insights is called, karya vimukti. Once we reach this state, then we gradually get established in this kaivalya state. So, these 4 states I'm going to explain. First of all, when you reach this state, a yogi realizes that he has attained something which is a final answer to the problem in his mind. We have to remember, earlier I mentioned parinama dukkha. Every noble mind, even when he or she has no problem in a worldly sense, will have a desire for a higher spiritual evolution. This is called parinama dukkha. And then this is called suffering. So it is not suffering in the worldly sense of the term. I already explained earlier, Vyasa gives this commentary. A real yogi develops a higher mental faculty. So he says, Vyasa says, even if a small insect is about to fall into our eyes, or even a small object, a needle or anything that touches our eyelids, we will have a strong sensation because the eyelids have got strong sensitivity. A yogi's mind develops this higher sensitivity. Because though there is no problem for him in the worldly sense, because of his desire for a higher meaning, for higher spiritual achievement, he feels a kind of inner discontentment, inner dissatisfaction, inner incompleteness, inner imperfection. This is the suffering for a yogi. And then he understands, next stage he understands the real cause for this suffering is the association due to avidya. Whenever something happens to the external world, immediately we identify ourselves with that object. Or when we feel an internal emotion like anger, anxiety, or whatever may be, immediately our mind is affected by this association. And then the eradication of this suffering through Nirodha Samadhi, this you already explained. And then the means for eradication is to practice yoga, and gradually he reaches a level of complete spiritual freedom. Once he attains this, then he should slowly start practicing some of the fundamental disciplines. We'll explain this in 28 and especially from 29th Sutra onwards. Now we will have interaction, maybe for 15 minutes or longer. Please remember, after this class, we will have a long interval. So this is the last class before the winter recess. The next class will be on Friday, January the 22nd, 7:30 around this time. January 22nd, 2016. Now we can have interaction. Okay.
Swamiji, you mentioned this idea from Vivekananda of going towards kaivalya or freedom by controlling our internal or external nature. How do we find a good balance with this idea of controlling, which makes me think of tapas, which maybe I'm wrong about that, with this idea of Ishvara Pranidhana of surrender?
Yes, in the coming sutras, when we are going to deal with Yama Niyama Ashtanga Yoga from 29th Sutra, the second chapter onwards, we will discuss this. Ishvara Pranidhana helps you to make up for whatever drawbacks you have got in developing other yamas and niyamas. So, ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, abhirigraha, tapa, shauja, santosha, swadhyaya, ishvara pranidhana. The 10th one of the niyama, 5th of the niyamas, is ishvara pranidhana dva, it means, or through ishvara pranidhana. Ishvara pranidhana literally in the spiritual sense of the, in spiritual sense it means kind of complete resignation. Patanjali doesn't accept the existence of a monotheistic God the way popular religions, organized religions, or popular Hinduism or Buddhism, of course Buddhism doesn't accept, and by the Christianity, Islam, Judaism accepts. But Patanjali system accepts the existence of higher spiritual souls who have attained this goal, Prakriti Lila Purusha, higher spiritual goals. So once you resign yourself to a higher spiritual personality, you naturally, your mind will naturally idealize him. And that idealization, when you try to imitate through constant contemplation the characteristics or qualities of these highly evolved souls, you naturally develop those qualities.
So it will make you, it will sort of be an incentive to sort of, like you said, imitate or practice.
Yes. Suppose we have not fully attained ahimsa, the first of the yamas, for example. Or we have not fully attained satya or abharigraha. Means any of these 10 important qualities, as you know. So there is some degree of imperfection in that. But if you have got this idea of resignation to God, then that idea of resignation, that you are fully resigned to God or His will be always there in your mind. So that will keep your mind attuned to this higher spiritual ideal. So if you are not fully perfect in getting established in the ideal of ahimsa, satya, abhrigraha, any of these qualities, cleanliness, saucha, or any of these qualities, this constant contemplation which automatically follows resignation will help you to get more fully established in these characteristics. That is the idea of prapatti in a different sense in the Vaishnava tradition. When you completely Sharanagati is called, 6 important characteristics for a devotee. It's mentioned in the Vaishnava tradition by Ramanuja and others. Anugulyasya sankalpaka pradigulyasya varjanam rakshasya vishwasva goptutta varanam tatha atma nikshepa karpanne shadvidha Sharanagati. So Sharanagati means pravarti, complete resignation, surrender to God's will. Not in yoga, but in the Vaishnava monotheistic tradition. And you find the same idea in different sense in confessions, complete surrender to God's will. In many traditions you find, all monotheistic traditions. So there the idea is, first you tune your mind towards God and you avoid all negative thought currents. You accept God as your protector. You resign yourself to God's will. So if you do all these 6 characteristics I mentioned, surrender yourself, resign yourself to God's will and His protection. If this is done sincerely, then that sincerity will always have a restraining effect in our mind. It depends upon the sincerity and earnestness of the devotee. If you do confession in a mechanical sense, then it becomes a kind of license renewal program. But if confession is sincere, you can find it be beginning of a saint, it be birth of a saint. Real confession can take you to the higher level of spiritual life. That's St. Augustine, St. Confession's famous classic. That's what St. Augustine means in confession. So very often that's happened. So Ishwar Pradhana has got a great psychological relevance and implication in spiritual life, not only in yoga system but elsewhere. In yoga system, it helps you to get more and more fully established in the other 9 fundamental disciplines, yama niyamas. In the bhakti tradition, in a spiritual sense, it helps you to be more fully established in our own spiritual practice, because the constant somebody will be reminding you, sitting in your heart, see, you have resigned yourself to God. You can't act this way. You have to act this way. Of course, this restraining effect will be in direct proportion to the earnestness and sincerity with which we have resigned ourselves to God's will. There's a close interconnection.
It seems like, maybe you can clarify this for me a little bit, that when you do the surrender, it brings in the human qualities of emotions which are not pure yet, and you just surrender, but you're invoking something beyond those human qualities like the egolessness and so on, but it's a human path to get to that place.
Real surrender helps God to interfere on your behalf. Because real surrender, in the highest sense of the term, as it is understood praparti in Vedanta, in the Vaishnava tradition, we expand ourselves to a higher dimension. So it, in a way, allows God to interfere, to meddle with our life, depending upon the earnestness and sincerity with which we have resigned ourselves. If it's purely mechanical, then the effect will be so much less. If it is really intense, it will be much more. You can see in the life of one great devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, Girichandra Ghosh, who was a drunkard who led a very loose life, but he had real faith. He was a bit of a conundrum, a peculiar type of person. He was a genius, but at the same time he was a profligate in a way. He was an actor. But he has tremendous faith. So when he surrendered himself to Sri Ramakrishna by giving power of attorney, he did that in the real sense of the term. So after that, his whole life underwent a complete transformation. Literally, he became a saint. But that happened because he was so sincere. The question arises: why does it happen in the life of all devotees? Again, it depends upon the earnestness or the sincerity, the intensity with which we resign. Is again related to the previous samskaras and vasanas. So Viveka Khyadi is mentioned here in the Patanjali system. He says, you may have Viveka Khyadi, means this attaining this higher discriminative faculty, discerning faculty. But depending upon our own intensity, it starts functioning. So in some cases, some people may sincerely surrender themselves to God's will, but again they will have to work very hard, gradually, to realize the true meaning of that surrender. But some highly evolved souls who have led good life in the past, in the previous life, may have done something wrong, so they happen to be born in a difficult circumstance, like Girish Chandra Ghosh, for example. Sri Ramakrishna says that he was a great man, some spiritual seeker in the previous life. So, in their case, this sudden resignation, it becomes so intense that happens to be the beginning of a new life for them. It doesn't happen. In fact, even intellectually, if we can, remember when I use the word God, I should modify that word in a very Vedantic sense. God in the Vedantic sense. Because God has got very unfortunate implications in modern times. In Vedanta, when we use the word God, it always means, the word means God of the whole humanity. The God who is the God of even those who do not believe in Him. God doesn't divide mankind into believers and non-believers and have an understanding with those who believe in Him and those who do not believe in Him are outside. No. So in Vedantic sense, God is the God of all. So Swami Vivekananda in the yoga lectures, interpretations, he makes a great statement, which I quoted earlier. Even if you do not believe in God, you live your life in such a way that God will accept you, even if you don't believe in Him. So that's a sense in which the word God is used in this Vedantic sense. God of the whole humanity. Not God of religions, but God of spirituality rather. So in that sense, true genuine surrender will make us better human beings, will spiritualize our whole life, and then that belief, that surrender, that prapatti will make it impossible for us to hate anyone, to do harm to anyone psychologically or physically or in any way. So that will have a restraining effect in our whole life. So that's what Patanjali means by this. If you resign yourself to God in such a way, then you get automatically well established in non-violence, truthfulness, universal love for the whole creation. All these qualities gradually come to you because you are always thinking of God and you always remember that you have resigned yourself to Him. That's what happened to Girish Chandra Ghosh. Girish Chandra Ghosh became a great saint. So from a drunkard to a saint. So I don't have time to describe the whole story. It's a classic example of how a person can become a saint through this resignation. So we will have a long holiday. So Merry, Happy Christmas to everyone. Thank you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.